of a history week in many communities. A friend sent me a news photo of a man dragging a cross down Main Street in Bangor, Maine. He was surrounded by spear-carrying soldiers and followed by a throng of people. It was a community reenactment of the Stations of the Cross by 2 Catholic parishes in neighboring towns. It was really pretty powerful, but tiring too, Steve Charette, 16 of Hampton, said for his role as Roman soldier. Being part of a group that carried out the crucifixion put it in a different perspective. But actually being one of the people who nailed Jesus to the cross made it a little more powerful. They also, fortunately, interviewed the 26-year-old man who portrayed Jesus and who seemed unharmed by the event. But perhaps this Friday, you noticed that it was the full moon. This month, in the Hebrew calendar, the 7-day Jewish festival of Passover, or Pesach, begins on the day of the full moon, or the night of the full moon. The festival is preceded by the cleaning out of all yeast and raised breads from the house. It's a sort of a thorough spring cleaning. And then, for the duration of the festival, the only bread that it's eaten is unleavened bread, which is eaten in memory of the flight from Egypt, when the people of Israel left Pharaoh's empire so quickly that they did not have time for the bread to rise. You know, in some years, the Muslim Hajj would have also just finished, where millions of Muslims recreate Hagar's search for water in the desert, Abraham's sacrifice of a ram instead of his son Isaac, and other events that are told in the Holy Quran. So, what do these commemorations have in common? They're all forms of embodied history, the recreation of a historical context through pilgrimage, performance, or ritual. And to each of these communities, the recreation is done in response to a holy commandment. So far, I think many of you know and maybe can actually remember participating in one of these rituals. Some of you can recite the Stations of the Cross and the proper prayers, and perhaps some of you know the answers to the 4 questions and the prayers which precede the drinking of the cups of wine, or in this case, grape juice. And possibly one of you may even know the feeling of sleeping under the stars outside of the city of Mecca. As a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, I don't know any of these things. So the knowledge of the transformative properties of these rituals is secondhand. For example, I know from his autobiography that community activist and civil rights leader Malcolm X was transformed by his participation in the Hajj. He wrote, "There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. There were all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and the non-white. America needs to understand Islam because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem." You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced, has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held. And so I find myself wondering what in our Unitarian Universalist histories can rearrange thought patterns previously held. What do we have in our relatively brief history? Certainly we don't have a commandment, mitzvah, or papal decree to compel us to participate. The Torah says it clearly in the book of Exodus. The feast of unleavened bread shalt thou keep. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee. In the time of the month of Abib, in the month of Abib, thou camest out of Egypt. Unitarian Universalists don't have thou shalts in them, except, of course, for recycling. And as such, some would say, if we decide to create rituals, we're appropriating an aspect of belief from others. The intellectual property theft would be unconscionable. For example, if our ritual included a Native American dance, or perhaps a composition combining several different tribal traditions, that's something that isn't even done when tribes get together. They all do only their own dances. We would clearly be guilty of cultural appropriation. And yet, of course, the world is full of adaptation and acknowledgement of sources. For example, the law in New Jersey is based on English common law, though there are several aspects of English common law which we've changed around, making our ritual of justice a new ritual, a New Jersey ritual, something that folks in England might not recognize. But why do it? Why do it? How can ritual and reenactment of Unitarian Universalist history change our lives? Well, interestingly enough, the evolution of chalice lighting as a way of centering our discussions, lectures, and meditations is clearly such a ritual. It's spread worldwide, as we could see from the South African chalice lighting reading that we used this morning. And in previous months, we've used them from Scotland, from Portugal, the Philippines, and Germany. The Universalists have a long tradition of gathering at Murray Grove, New Jersey, just south of Toms River, and remembering John Murray's first Universalist sermon in North America. I've been to one of those revivals, and sitting under the tents, singing and listening to the talks, it connected me with a sense of history and a sense of newness and possibility. It was one step in my transformation from electrical engineer to minister. It was a pilgrimage. And of course, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee this year is offering a trip to various civil rights spots around America, retelling the stories for those who were not born when those events happened. It has the potential for transformation, and I'm so glad that they are offering it. And I think that, just sort of speculating on this, I think transformation can come from some of the places that are unique to our heritage, too. For example, Unitarians have inherited the actions of the Puritans, including the witchcraft trials in eastern Massachusetts. And a study of the way that pseudoscience, mass anxiety, and perhaps even false witness created an evil, and how readily good people were complicit in and powerless against the effects of this evil, this could be a transformative experience of a pilgrimage, and really heavy, too. Another more modern and certainly more experienced, more positive experience of transformation was mentioned in a recent conversation with Jeff Taylor. Jeff attended General Assembly and as a delegate from this congregation, and he says that he was in some ways transformed by the plenary sessions of all things, which were 1,000 delegates, more than 1,000 delegates, all meeting together to debate, vote, and use the democratic process to set priorities for the denomination, as they have done for 150 years. Seeing such a large meeting being run well can change your thought patterns previously held and open your mind to new possibilities. Now, our Teal hymnal, which we didn't distribute this morning, has a song written by Orthodox Jewish Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach called Return Again, and it's number 1011. And it isn't explicitly Jewish. Indeed, it could apply to any group. The words include, return to the home of your soul, and return to where you are born and reborn again. Your soul, born and reborn again. Now, why do we assume that born again is something that's owned by fundamentalist Christians? We know that every soul has the ability to be born again in understanding. Perhaps you might do a pilgrimage to the Galapagos, where Charles Darwin was born again into Darwinism, and the old world of creationism and God's guiding hand was revisualized into a logical flow of Darwinian evolution. But why reborn again? Isn't that redundant? Well, our sermon title today comes from the 10 Commandments in the book of Exodus. No, not the 10 Commandments from the movie. Those deal with idolatry and that, but these are the 10 Commandments that deal with justice. And we are a justice-seeking people. Justice in a pluralistic society, actually. Exodus chapter 23, and we don't have Bibles in our pews. We don't have pews even, so there you go. You'll just have to trust me when I read this. Thou shalt not oppress the stranger, for you know the soul of the stranger, having been strangers in the land of Egypt. That's Exodus 23:9. It's the final one of a group that starts the chapter. And in a simple English translation we have, do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help them with it. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twists the words of the innocent. And finally, do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know what it feels like to be a foreigner, because you were foreigners in Egypt. I love that two of these have to do with animals. The first one being an admonition to return a stray animal, even if it belongs to your enemy. and sadly and non-biblically, it was extended to human beings during the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, a good example of unenlightened American lawmaking. But the other one deals with an animal in distress. It tells you to help anyone, even someone who hates you, if your help will relieve the suffering of an overloaded animal in distress. The well-being of the animal is greater than any human hatred. It says it right there in that commandment. Now, the commandment I want to concentrate on has a similar sense of empathy, not towards animals, but towards other human beings outside of your tribe. Are we tribal in our way of thinking? Are we tribal in our laws? Are we tribal in how we enforce our laws? Or do we have a ritual to remind our society of what it feels like to be a stranger? In the book of Genesis, the house of Israel is saved from starvation by the Egyptian Pharaoh. That history is retold around the Passover table each year. But it's not just retold. Passover is a reliving of those events. As Professor Yerushalmi wrote, for whatever memories are unleashed by the commemorative rituals and liturgies were surely not a matter of intellection, that is a logical discourse, but evocation and identification. That is, that the Seder ritual makes you feel as if you had been there. You were a stranger in Egypt. The breaking of the genetic, perhaps, predisposition to tribalism isn't something intellectual. You have to hear it, feel it, and return again and again. The book of Exodus does not blame the Egyptians for enslaving Israel. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, says the story. Indeed, modern Passover rituals include shedding tears for the Egyptian charioteers who were drowned in the Red Sea, and perhaps for the horses as well. The Exodus commandment to not oppress the stranger, for you know the soul of the stranger, having been saved strangers in the land of Egypt, it is to remind you what it feels like to be oppressed. That reminder is easily forgotten in watching the Hollywood selective version of Exodus. It's easily forgotten in a nation that celebrates its divine empowerment of rights as if it only applied to the dominant tribe rather than to all people. And in a nation where Christ is prayed to for wealth and a winning lottery card. Where the idea of leaving everything you have behind in the name of freedom is completely foreign. And where love takes a back seat to business. Maybe we need a ritual to remind our society of what it feels like to be an outsider. In this season of new growth, in this season of new hopes and new ideas, let us each remember again in our souls, a memory from before we were born, that one time we were strangers in Egypt. May this take you to new lands and new understandings. May it move you to compassion and move you to justice.